In the shadow of the looming Agiatis Mountains, Sparta of the 3rd century BCE stood as a pale reflection of its storied past. Once the unrivaled military powerhouse of Greece, the city-state now struggled under the weight of internal strife, political corruption, and external threats. The glory of the Spartan warriors, who had stood unshaken at Thermopylae and dominated the Peloponnesian League, seemed to belong to a distant, almost mythical time. Yet, even in its twilight, Sparta would give rise to a story of resilience, reform, and quiet defiance. At the heart of this tale is Agiatis, a woman whose life would intertwine with 2 kings and whose vision would inspire one of the most ambitious reform movements in Spartan history. Born into privilege as the daughter of the wealthy and influential Gylippos, Agiatis possessed both the intellect and courage that would make her a formidable figure in an era dominated by men. Her first marriage to Agis IV, the idealistic king of Sparta, marked the beginning of her journey as a reformist. Together, they envisioned a return to the ancient Lycurgan principles that had once made Sparta great: equality, discipline, and communal strength. However, such dreams came at a cost. Agis IV's reforms threatened the entrenched power of the Spartan oligarchy, and he paid the ultimate price for his vision, betrayal, and execution. Widowed and vulnerable, Agiatis became a pawn in the hands of Sparta's political elites, forced into a second marriage with Cleomenes III, a young prince destined to inherit the throne. What began as a union of necessity would evolve into a partnership of remarkable influence, with Agiatis shaping Cleomenes' vision and supporting his bold quest to restore Sparta's lost glory. This is the story of Agiatis, a queen whose wisdom and unwavering resolve left an indelible mark on one of history's most fascinating city-states. Her life, filled with triumphs and tragedies, is a testament to the power of individual conviction in the face of overwhelming odds. From the halls of Spartan power to the bloody battlefields of Sellasia, Agiatis' story intertwines with the fate of her city, her husband, and her son, echoing across the annals of history as a tale of courage, reform, and the relentless pursuit of justice. As we journey through her life, we will uncover not only the battles fought with swords but also the battles waged with ideals, ambition, and the unyielding spirit of a queen who dared to dream of a better Sparta. The sun hung low over the city-state of Sparta, casting long shadows across its crumbling walls and silent training fields. Sparta, once the proud and unyielding power of Greece, now bore the scars of its decline. The glory days of Thermopylae and the Peloponnesian League had faded into memory, replaced by internal strife and the looming shadow of Macedonia's growing dominance. In this fragile landscape, 2 figures emerged with a vision to revive the Spartan legacy: Agis IV, the idealistic young king, and Agiatis, a woman whose wisdom and courage would leave an indelible mark on history. Agiatis was born into a world of privilege, the daughter of Gylippos, a man of immense wealth and influence in Spartan society. Her upbringing was far from ordinary. Unlike most Spartan women, who were trained in physical strength and discipline but kept distant from the political realm, Agiatis grew up with a sharp intellect and a keen awareness of the struggles her city faced. Her father, a fervent believer in the ideals of Sparta's legendary lawgiver Lycurgus, often spoke of a time when equality and discipline defined their society. These tales ignited a spark in the young Agiatis, shaping her into a woman who would not be content to remain in the shadows. It was during this tumultuous time that Agis IV ascended the throne of Sparta at a mere 19 years old. Handsome, charismatic, and deeply influenced by the egalitarian principles of Lycurgus, Agis possessed a vision that was both revolutionary and dangerous. He sought to restore Sparta's glory by addressing the glaring inequalities that had taken root within its society. The Spartan elite, once bound by a shared sense of duty and discipline, had grown complacent and corrupt. Land and wealth had become concentrated in the hands of a few, leaving many Spartans impoverished and disenfranchised. The citizen soldiers, the backbone of Sparta's military might, had dwindled to a mere fraction of their former numbers. Agis believed that the only way to save Sparta was through a radical redistribution of land and the cancellation of debts, a return to the communal values that had once made his city great. It was a bold vision, and it needed a partner who shared his ideals and could support him in the battles to come. That partner was Agiatis. The marriage between Agis IV and Agiatis was not merely a union of two prominent families. It was the merging of two minds deeply committed to a common cause. From the moment they met, there was an unspoken understanding between them. Agis found in Agiatis not just a loyal wife but an equal who shared his passion for reform. She had inherited her father's conviction and possessed a rare ability to articulate her thoughts with clarity and purpose. Together, they began laying the groundwork for what they hoped would be a new era for Sparta. Their vision, however, was not without its opponents. The Spartan oligarchy, a powerful faction of wealthy landowners and entrenched elites, viewed Agis reforms as a direct threat to their privileges. They had no intention of relinquishing their wealth and power without a fight. At the forefront of this opposition stood Leonidas II, a co-king of Sparta from the rival Agiad dynasty. Leonidas was a shrewd and calculating man who had grown rich through his connections with foreign powers, particularly Macedonia. He saw Agis' idealism as naive and dangerous, a challenge that needed to be crushed before it could take root. Despite the mounting opposition, Agis and Agiatis pressed forward with their plans. Agis began by donating his own land and wealth to the common treasury, setting an example for others to follow. This act of selflessness won him the support of the lower classes, who saw him as a true champion of the people. Agiatis, meanwhile, used her influence and charisma to rally Spartan women to the cause. In a society where women held considerable control over property, their support was crucial for the success of the reforms. Together, Agis and Agiatis became a beacon of hope for the disenfranchised citizens of Sparta. Their message resonated with those who longed for a return to the values of equality and communal strength. The streets of Sparta buzzed with talk of change, and for a brief moment, it seemed as though the dream of a revitalized Sparta might become a reality. But the forces arrayed against them were formidable. Leonidas II, with the backing of the oligarchy, orchestrated a campaign to discredit Agis and his reforms. He accused the young king of being a reckless idealist who sought to upend the natural order of society. These accusations gained traction among the conservative factions of Sparta, who feared the instability that such radical changes might bring. As tensions escalated, the Spartan assembly became a battleground for competing visions of the city's future. Agis and Agiatis found themselves surrounded by enemies, their every move scrutinized and challenged. Yet, they refused to back down. Agis spoke passionately of the need for unity and sacrifice, while Agiatis worked tirelessly behind the scenes to counter the oligarchy's propaganda. The turning point came when Leonidas II was deposed in a dramatic vote by the Spartan assembly, paving the way for Agis to implement his reforms. For a brief moment, it seemed as though victory was within their grasp. Agis began redistributing land and canceling debts, earning the adoration of the common people. Agiatis, ever the strategist, played a key role in ensuring that the reforms were executed efficiently and fairly. But the victory was short-lived. Leonidas II, exiled but not defeated, conspired with his allies to stage a counter-coup. With the support of Macedonian forces, he returned to Sparta, unleashing a wave of violence and repression against Agis and his supporters. Agis was arrested and put on trial, accused of treason against the state. Despite his eloquent defense, he was condemned to death. Agiatis, now a widow, was left to pick up the pieces of their shattered dream. Her grief was profound, but it did not break her. Instead, it steeled her resolve to continue the fight for a better Sparta. Her story was far from over, and her next chapter would see her thrust into a new and unexpected role, one that would forever link her name with the legacy of another reformist king, Cleomenes III. The death of Agis IV sent shockwaves through Sparta. His bold reforms and tragic end had left an indelible mark on the city. But the forces of reaction had triumphed. Leonidas II, having reclaimed the throne, sought to consolidate his power and crush any lingering resistance. At the center of this political maelstrom stood Agiatis, now widowed and vulnerable, yet still carrying the ideals of her late husband. Leonidas knew the power of symbols in politics, and Agiatis, as the widow of Agis IV, was a potent one. To neutralize her influence, he devised a calculated plan. Agiatis would marry his son, Cleomenes III, a young and untested prince who had yet to make his mark on Spartan politics. For Leonidas, this was a pragmatic move. By tying Agiatis to his family, he could claim legitimacy over the reforms of Agis IV while ensuring her voice was subdued. Agiatis had no choice but to comply. Resistance would have meant exile or worse. The marriage was, by all accounts, a union born of necessity rather than love. Cleomenes was just a teenager, inexperienced and eager to prove himself in a city fraught with political intrigue. Agiatis, in contrast, was already a woman of substance, her life shaped by tragedy and the relentless pursuit of justice. Yet, despite the circumstances, their relationship would evolve into something far more meaningful than anyone, including Leonidas, had anticipated. In the early days of their marriage, Cleomenes was a figure of curiosity to Agiatis. He was not like his father, whose ambition was rooted in self-preservation and power. Instead, Cleomenes possessed a sharp intellect and an almost naive eagerness to understand the world around him. He listened intently to Agiatis' stories of Agis IV's vision, the ideals of Lycurgus, and the sacrifices made in the name of reform. What began as reluctant conversations soon turned into deep and philosophical discussions that would shape Cleomenes' worldview. For Cleomenes, Agiatis became not just a wife but a mentor and confidant. She spoke of a Sparta that could rise again, not through domination but through unity and shared purpose. Her words planted a seed in Cleomenes' mind, one that would grow as he matured and took on more responsibilities. Over time, he began to see the truth in her arguments. Sparta could not survive on its current path of decay and inequality. Reform was not just an ideal, it was a necessity. Despite the growing bond between them, their marriage was not without challenges. Leonidas kept a watchful eye on Agiatis, wary of her influence over his son. The Spartan court, ever a den of intrigue, was filled with whispers and rumors about her true intentions. Some saw her as a dangerous agitator, a relic of Agis IV's failed revolution. Others admired her courage and steadfastness, even in the face of adversity. For Agiatis, these tensions were a constant reminder of the precarious position she occupied. As the years passed, Cleomenes grew into his role as prince, participating in military campaigns and learning the intricacies of Spartan politics. He was a natural leader, bold and decisive, but it was his conversations with Agiatis that truly shaped his vision for the future. Unlike his father, Cleomenes began to see the oligarchy not as an ally but as an obstacle to Sparta's revival. He understood that the inequalities within the city were not just a social failing but a strategic vulnerability that threatened Sparta's survival. The turning point came when Cleomenes began to assert himself against his father. In private, he challenged Leonidas' decisions, questioning the wisdom of allying with Macedonia and the morality of suppressing the Spartan lower classes. Leonidas, ever the pragmatist, dismissed these concerns as youthful idealism. But Cleomenes was undeterred. His growing confidence and conviction were fueled by Agiatis, who encouraged him to think beyond the immediate and envision a Sparta that could reclaim its former greatness. For Agiatis, this transformation in Cleomenes was both a vindication of her beliefs and a source of hope. She saw in him the potential to finish what Agis IV had started, to take the ideals they had fought for and turn them into a reality. Yet, she also knew the dangers that lay ahead. The the forces that had destroyed Agis IV were still very much in power, and any attempt at reform would be met with fierce resistance. Their relationship deepened as they faced these challenges together. What had begun as a marriage of convenience grew into a genuine partnership. Agiatis, despite the pain of her past, found solace in Cleomenes' determination and sincerity. Cleomenes, in turn, drew strength from Agiatis' wisdom and resilience. Together, they began to quietly prepare for a future that would challenge the status quo and bring Sparta back to its roots. The seeds of change were sown during these formative years. Cleomenes' time as prince was marked by a growing dissatisfaction with the state of Sparta and a desire to restore its glory. Agiatis, ever the strategist, played a crucial role in shaping his vision and preparing him for the battles to come. She introduced him to allies of Agis IV, rekindling old networks of reformists who had been forced into silence. She also worked tirelessly to preserve the memory of Agis IV's reforms, ensuring that the ideals of equality and discipline would not be forgotten. By the time Cleomenes ascended the throne, he was no longer the inexperienced prince that Leonidas had sought to control. He was a man with a mission, driven by a vision of reform and inspired by the woman who had stood by his side. For Agiatis, the stakes were higher than ever. She had lost one husband to the dream of a better Sparta. She was determined not to lose another. As Cleomenes began to implement his reforms, Agiatis stood with him, her unwavering support a testament to her commitment to their shared vision. Together, they would embark on a journey that would test their resolve, challenge the very foundations of Spartan society, and leave a legacy that would be remembered for centuries to come. The ascension of Cleomenes III to the throne of Sparta marked a pivotal moment in the city-state's troubled history. The death of his father, Leonidas II, left a void in the leadership of a nation that had grown complacent and fractured. Cleomenes inherited a kingdom teetering on the brink of irrelevance, its once proud legacy tarnished by internal strife and external subjugation. Yet, beneath the surface of his unassuming demeanor lay a fiery determination to restore Sparta to its former glory, a resolve shaped by the ideals imparted to him by Agiatis. Cleomenes' early days as king were marked by cautious observation. He understood that Sparta's oligarchy, though fractured, still wielded considerable power, and any misstep could lead to his downfall. The young king, however, was not one to act recklessly. With Agiatis by his side, he began to methodically assess the state of the city and its people, taking note of the disparities that had eroded the Spartan ethos. The Spartan citizenry, once the backbone of the military state, had dwindled to a mere shadow of its former numbers. Land ownership, the hallmark of Spartan equality, was concentrated in the hands of a privileged few, while many of the city's inhabitants were reduced to servitude or left to fend for themselves in poverty. This inequity gnawed at Cleomenes' conscience, reminding him of the ideals of Lycurgus that had once defined Spartan society. Agiatis, as ever, played a pivotal role during this period of transition. Her experience with Agis IV's ill-fated reforms provided her with invaluable insights into the dangers Cleomenes would face. She counseled him to move deliberately, to build alliances among those who shared their vision of a revitalized Sparta. Her wisdom, tempered by the lessons of the past, became an anchor for Cleomenes as he began to chart his path forward. The first challenge Cleomenes faced as king came not from within Sparta but from its powerful neighbor, Macedonia, under the leadership of Antigonus III Docen. Macedonia had emerged as the dominant force in the Greek world, casting a long shadow over the Peloponnesian Peninsula. Cleomenes knew that any attempt to implement reforms in Sparta would inevitably bring him into conflict with Antigonus, whose influence extended deep into Spartan politics. For now, however, he chose to bide his time, focusing on consolidating his position at home. Cleomenes' initial efforts as king were aimed at restoring a sense of discipline and purpose to Spartan society. He reintroduced elements of the agoge, the rigorous training system that had once produced Sparta's legendary warriors. This move, though controversial among the elite, was welcomed by the common people, who saw it as a return to the values that had defined their city. Agiatis, meanwhile, worked tirelessly behind the scenes to build support for their vision. Her reputation as the widow of Agis IV lent her considerable credibility among the reformist factions, and her ability to articulate the ideals of equality and communal strength won her the admiration of many. Together, she and Cleomenes began to lay the groundwork for the most ambitious set of reform Sparta had seen in generations. The turning point came when Cleomenes decided to challenge the oligarchy directly. Unlike his father, who had sought to preserve the status quo, Cleomenes recognized that true reform required bold action. He began by targeting the ephors, the powerful magistrates who had long served as a check on royal authority. The ephors, deeply entrenched in the oligarchic system, were staunchly opposed to any redistribution of land or power. Cleomenes, understanding that their opposition would be insurmountable, took decisive action. One fateful night, with the support of a loyal cadre of soldiers, Cleomenes launched a coup against the ephors. The attack was swift and brutal. 4 of the 5 ephors were killed, and their authority was effectively dismantled. This act of defiance sent shockwaves through Sparta, marking the beginning of a new era in the city's history. For Cleomenes, it was a necessary step to clear the path for his reforms. For Agiatis, it was a moment of vindication, a sign that her husband was willing to take the risks necessary to achieve their shared vision. With the ephors eliminated, Cleomenes moved quickly to implement his reforms. The redistribution of land was his first priority. He ordered the division of the vast estates held by the oligarchy, redistributing them among the disenfranchised Spartan citizens. This move not only addressed the economic disparities within the city, but also revitalized its military potential by increasing the number of eligible citizen soldiers. Cleomenes also canceled debts, alleviating the burden that had weighed heavily on the lower classes. Agiatis played a central role in ensuring the success of these reforms. Her ability to navigate the complex web of Spartan politics proved invaluable as she worked to gain the support of key figures and placate those who might resist the changes. Her presence also served as a constant reminder of the sacrifices made by Agis IV, lending a sense of moral urgency to Cleomenes' efforts. The response to the reforms was mixed. Among the common people, Cleomenes was hailed as a savior, a king who had restored their dignity and given them a stake in the future of their city. Among the oligarchy, however, resentment festered. Many of those who had lost their wealth and power began to conspire against Cleomenes, seeking to undermine his rule by any means necessary. Despite these challenges, Cleomenes pressed forward. His reforms extended beyond land redistribution and debt cancellation. He sought to reinvigorate Spartan society by reestablishing the communal dining halls and promoting a sense of shared purpose among its citizens. These measures, though rooted in the traditions of Lycurgus, were revolutionary in their scope and ambition. Agiatis, ever the strategist, recognized that the success of these reforms depended on Cleomenes' ability to maintain control over the city. She encouraged him to strengthen his ties with the military, ensuring that he had the loyalty of the soldiers who would be crucial in defending their vision. Cleomenes, inspired by her counsel, embarked on a series of military campaigns to assert Sparta's dominance in the Peloponnesian region. These campaigns, though initially successful, brought Cleomenes into direct conflict with Macedonia. Antigonus III Theodosian, alarmed by the rise of a resurgent Sparta, began to rally the other Greek city-states against Cleomenes. The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine the fate of Sparta and the legacy of its reformist king. For Cleomenes and Agiatis, the path ahead was fraught with danger. Their vision of a revitalized Sparta had breathed new life into the city, but it had also awakened powerful enemies. As they prepared for the battles to come, they knew that their fight was not just for the survival of Sparta, but for the ideals that had guided their journey. A fight that would test their resolve and define their place in history. Cleomenes III's reforms, bold and unprecedented, became the defining hallmark of his reign, with the ephors eliminated and opposition momentarily quelled. Cleomenes turned his attention to the monumental task of transforming Sparta from within. The reforms were not merely political maneuvers. They were an audacious attempt to restore the ancient principles of Lycurgus and redefine the Spartan identity. At the heart of these changes was the influence of Agiatis, whose unwavering support and wisdom fueled Cleomenes' determination. The most revolutionary aspect of Cleomenes' reforms was the redistribution of land. Sparta's decline had been tied closely to the concentration of land in the hands of a few wealthy elites. Over generations, this inequality had eroded the backbone of the Spartan military system, which relied on a broad base of citizen soldiers. Cleomenes, guided by the ideals Agiatis had championed since her marriage to Agis IV, implemented a radical land redistribution program. The estates of the oligarchs were seized and divided among thousands of disenfranchised citizens, creating a new class of landowning Spartans. This redistribution not only addressed the glaring economic disparities within the city but also revitalized its military. Cleomenes required each new landowner to undergo military training and contribute to the communal defense of Sparta. The number of hoplites swelled as a result, and for the first time in decades, Sparta began to resemble the militarized society of its legendary past. Agiatis, ever the strategist, played a critical role in ensuring the success of these measures. Her deep understanding of the political landscape allowed her to anticipate potential resistance and navigate the complexities of Spartan society. She worked tirelessly to build alliances with reform-minded citizens and moderate members of the elite, ensuring that Cleomenes' reforms had the support they needed to take root. The cancellation of debts was another cornerstone of Cleomenes' reforms. Over time, many Spartans had fallen into debt bondage, losing their land and their status as citizens. Cleomenes, recognizing the corrosive impact of this system, declared all debts null and void. This act won him the adoration of the common people, who saw him as a liberator and a true heir to the egalitarian ideals of Lycurgus. With the economic foundation of Sparta transformed, Cleomenes turned his attention to the revival of the Agos, the rigorous training system that had once produced Sparta's legendary warriors. For decades, the Agos had been neglected, its once mandatory training regimen limited to a shrinking elite. Cleomenes re-established the Agos as a cornerstone of Spartan life, requiring all male citizens to undergo the discipline and physical conditioning that had defined Spartan society for centuries. The communal dining halls, or syssitia, were also restored. These institutions had been central to Sparta's egalitarian ethos, fostering a sense of camaraderie and shared purpose among its citizens. Cleomenes mandated that all citizens, regardless of wealth or status, participate in these communal meals. Agiatis, understanding the symbolic importance of the syssitia, organized efforts to ensure their success. She personally oversaw the preparation of meals in her district, setting an example for others to follow. Her involvement earned her the admiration of the people, who saw in her a queen who truly lived by the principles she espoused. However, these sweeping changes were not without their challenges. The Spartan oligarchy, though weakened, was far from defeated. Many of those who had lost their land and wealth began to conspire against Cleomenes, seeking to undermine his reforms and restore the old order. Agiatis, aware of these undercurrents, worked tirelessly to counter their influence. She organized secret meetings with reformist factions, ensuring that Cleomenes had a network of loyal supporters to defend his vision. Beyond internal opposition, Cleomenes faced mounting pressure from external forces. Antigonus III Theodoson, the king of Macedonia, viewed Cleomenes' reforms as a direct threat to his influence in the Peloponnesian region. Macedonia, long the dominant power in Greece, could not tolerate a resurgent Sparta challenging its hegemony. Antigonus began to rally other Greek city-states against Cleomenes, forming a coalition that sought to isolate and weaken Sparta. Undeterred, Cleomenes pressed forward. He recognized that the survival of his reforms depended on Sparta's ability to project strength beyond its borders. He launched a series of military campaigns to expand Spartan influence and secure strategic alliances. These campaigns were marked by Cleomenes' brilliance as a commander and his ability to inspire loyalty among his troops. Under his leadership, Sparta achieved a series of stunning victories, reclaiming territories that had been lost for generations. Agiatis, though not a warrior, played an essential role in these efforts. She worked to maintain morale on the home front, ensuring that the families of soldiers were cared for and that the city remained united in its support for Cleomenes' campaigns. Her leadership extended to the women of Sparta, who played a crucial role in maintaining the communal structures that Cleomenes had restored. Despite these successes, the strain of constant warfare began to take its toll. Cleomenes faced the daunting task of balancing the demands of reform with the realities of military conflict. Agiatis, ever his closest confidant, provided him with the emotional and intellectual support he needed to navigate these challenges. Their partnership, forged in the crucible of political and personal adversity, became the foundation of their shared legacy. The culmination of Cleomenes' reforms was a dramatic reimagining of Spartan governance. He declared himself the sole ruler of Sparta, abolishing the traditional dual kingship that had defined the city-state for centuries. This move, though controversial, was necessary to ensure the continuity of his reforms. Cleomenes justified his actions by invoking the authority of Lycurgus, presenting himself as a restorer of Spartan tradition rather than a usurper. For a time, it seemed as though Cleomenes and Agiatis had succeeded in their quest to revitalize Sparta. The city's economy was reborn, its military reinvigorated, and its citizens united under a common purpose. Yet, the forces arrayed against them, both within and beyond Sparta, were growing stronger. The oligarchy, though weakened, continued to plot against Cleomenes, while Macedonia's coalition loomed ever closer. As Cleomenes and Agiatis prepared for the battles to come, they knew that their fight was far from over. The reforms they had fought so hard to implement had breathed new life into Sparta, but they had also awakened powerful enemies. Their shared vision, born of idealism and tempered by adversity, would soon be tested in ways they could not yet imagine. The growing shadow of Macedonia loomed ominously over Sparta as Cleomenes III's reforms began to transform the city-state. The successes of his policies, from land redistribution to the revitalization of the Agos, had not gone unnoticed. For Macedonia, led by the cunning and pragmatic Antigonus III Theodoson, the resurgence of Sparta was not merely a domestic affair, it was a threat to the delicate balance of power in Greece. Cleomenes' Sparta, with its renewed military strength and egalitarian ideals, stood in stark contrast to the oligarchic and Macedonian-dominated leagues that controlled much of the Peloponnesian Peninsula. Antigonus, an astute observer of political dynamics, understood that Cleomenes' reforms had the potential to ignite unrest beyond Sparta's borders. Other Greek city-states, particularly those suffering under oppressive oligarchies or Macedonian domination, might see Cleomenes as a symbol of resistance. The possibility of a broader rebellion against Macedonian influence was too dangerous to ignore. To counter this threat, Antigonus began forging alliances with Sparta's enemies, weaving a web of political and military pressure that would soon engulf the resurgent city-state. For Cleomenes, the stakes were clear. If Sparta was to survive and thrive, it would need to assert itself militarily. His reforms had restored the strength of the Spartan army, swelling its ranks with newly enfranchised citizens eager to defend their land and their way of life. Cleomenes knew, however, that Sparta could not stand alone against Macedonia's might. He needed allies, and this realization set him on a path to secure the loyalty of neighboring city-states. Agiatis, as always, was deeply involved in these efforts. Her understanding of the broader political landscape proved invaluable as Cleomenes sought to navigate the labyrinth of alliances and rivalries that defined Greek politics. Agiatis urged him to appeal to the common people of other city-states, who might see in Sparta's reforms a glimmer of hope for their own liberation. Cleomenes, inspired by her counsel, positioned himself not just as a king but as a champion of the oppressed. Their efforts bore fruit, but not without difficulties. Cleomenes managed to win over several smaller city-states, promising them protection and a share in the vision of a reformed Peloponnesian order. His victories on the battlefield, marked by strategic brilliance and the discipline of the Spartan phalanx, further solidified his reputation as a leader capable of challenging Macedonian supremacy. Under his command, Spartan forces reclaimed key territories, driving out Macedonian garrisons and emboldening their allies. Yet, the threat posed by Antigonus was ever present. Macedonia's wealth and resources dwarfed those of Sparta, and its ability to field vast armies was unmatched. Antigonus, biding his time, began to prepare for a decisive confrontation with Cleomenes. In the meantime, he sought to weaken Sparta through subterfuge, encouraging the oligarchic factions within the city to rise against Cleomenes' rule. Agiatis, ever vigilant, recognized the danger posed by these internal divisions. She worked tirelessly to maintain unity within Sparta, rallying support for Cleomenes among the newly enfranchised citizens and the reformist factions. Her leadership extended beyond the political realm. She became a unifying figure for Spartan women, organizing efforts to support the army and sustain morale during the prolonged conflict. Agiatis' presence was a reminder of the sacrifices made for the reforms and the shared vision that bound the people together. As the tension between Sparta and Macedonia escalated, Cleomenes faced an agonizing decision. Should he risk everything in a direct confrontation with Antigonus, or should he seek to buy time by negotiating a truce? Agiatis, understanding the gravity of the situation, urged him to remain steadfast. She reminded him that the ideals they had fought for, equality, discipline, and the restoration of Spartan greatness, were worth any sacrifice. The critical moment came in 222 BCE, when Antigonus, leading a coalition of Greek city-states under the banner of the Hellenic League, marched south with a massive army. His goal was clear: to crush Cleomenes and reassert Macedonian dominance over the Peloponnesus. Cleomenes, aware of the overwhelming odds, resolved to meet the challenge head-on. He withdrew his forces to the fortified city of Sellasia, strategically positioned in a narrow pass that favored the defensive tactics of the Spartan phalanx. The Spartan army, though vastly outnumbered, was a formidable force. Cleomenes had drilled his troops to perfection, instilling in them the discipline and courage that had defined Sparta's warriors of old. Agiatis, unable to join the battlefield, remained in Sparta, organizing efforts to provide supplies and reinforcements. She worked tirelessly, her determination a source of inspiration for the citizens who faced an uncertain future. As the armies of Sparta and Macedonia prepared for the decisive battle, the stakes could not have been higher. For Cleomenes, this was a fight not just for the survival of his reforms but for the very soul of Sparta. For Agiatis, it was a moment of profound hope and fear, a test of the ideals she had championed throughout her life. The Battle of Sellasia would become a defining moment in the history of Sparta, a clash of visions for the future of Greece. Cleomenes and his army stood as a testament to the power of reform and resilience, while Antigonus represented the overwhelming might of a dominant empire. As the sun rose over the battlefield, the fate of Sparta hung in the balance, and the legacy of Cleomenes and Agiatis teetered on the edge of triumph or tragedy. The early morning air was heavy with anticipation as Cleomenes III and his Spartan army prepared to meet the Macedonian forces at Sellasia. The narrow pass, nestled between the mountains of Olympus and Evis, was chosen for its strategic advantage, offering the outnumbered Spartans a chance to neutralize Macedonia's superior numbers. For Cleomenes, this was more than a battle. It was a stand for the survival of Sparta's ideals and independence. For his troops, it was a fight for their families, their land, and the vision of a renewed Sparta, the Macedonian army, led by the formidable Antigonus III Theodoson, was a daunting sight. Thousands of professional soldiers, including the elite Macedonian phalanx, stood ready to crush the resurgent Spartans. Alongside them were allied contingents from the Hellenic League, cities that had pledged their support to Macedonia in exchange for protection or promises of autonomy. The sheer size and discipline of Antigonus' forces made it clear that this would be the ultimate test of Cleomenes' leadership and the Spartan resolve. Cleomenes had positioned his forces strategically, dividing them between the two hills that flanked the pass and the valley below. On Mount Olympus, he stationed his brother Eucleides, a capable commander entrusted with holding the high ground. Cleomenes himself took command of the forces on Mount Aegis, while the Spartan phalanx, the heart of his army, was stationed in the valley under his direct supervision. Every soldier knew the stakes. If they failed here, Sparta would fall, and the reforms they had fought for would be erased. The battle began with a thunderous clash as the Macedonians launched a frontal assault on the Spartan positions. Antigonus, understanding the importance of breaking the Spartan defenses quickly, threw his strongest units against Eucleides on Mount Olympus. The fight was brutal, with the Spartans holding their ground against wave after wave of Macedonian attacks. Eucleides and his men fought with unmatched tenacity, their spears glinting in the sunlight as they repelled the enemy. On Mount Aegis, Cleomenes faced his own challenge. The Macedonians, using their superior numbers, attempted to encircle his position, forcing him to rely on the discipline and cohesion of his troops. Cleomenes, ever the strategist, used the terrain to his advantage, launching counterattacks that disrupted the Macedonian advance. His presence on the battlefield, commanding with calm authority, inspired his men to fight with the ferocity of their ancestors. In the valley below, the Spartan phalanx faced the full might of the Macedonian army. The two formations clashed in a deafening cacophony of metal on metal, each side pushing against the other in a deadly contest of strength and endurance. The Spartans, though outnumbered, fought with a determination that matched their storied history. Every inch of ground was contested, and the air was thick with the cries of the wounded and dying. As the battle raged on, it became clear that the Spartans were fighting a losing battle. Despite their courage and discipline, the sheer weight of Macedonian numbers began to take its toll. On Mount Olympus, Eucleides' forces, exhausted and outflanked, were finally overwhelmed. The fall of Olympus allowed the Macedonians to outmaneuver Cleomenes' position on Mount Aegis, forcing the Spartan king to make a fateful decision. Cleomenes ordered a retreat, his mind racing with thoughts of preserving what remained of his army. The retreat was disciplined and orderly, a testament to the training and leadership that had revitalized Sparta's military. Yet, for the soldiers who left the battlefield, the sense of loss was palpable. The dream of a renewed Sparta, free from Macedonian domination, seemed to slip further from their grasp with each step they took. News of the defeat at Sellasia reached Sparta quickly, sending shockwaves through the city. Agiatis, who had remained behind to oversee the home front, received the reports with a mixture of grief and resolve. She understood the implications of the loss but refused to give in to despair. As the soldiers returned, weary and battered, she worked tirelessly to rally the people, reminding them that the ideals they fought for were worth preserving, even in the face of overwhelming odds. For Cleomenes, the defeat was a bitter pill to swallow. He had staked everything on this battle, believing that the spirit of Spartan resilience could overcome the might of Macedonia. Yet, as he regrouped with his surviving forces, he realized that the fight for Sparta's future was far from over. The loss at Sellasia was a setback, but it was not the end. In the aftermath of the battle, Cleomenes faced a grim reality. Antigonus, triumphant, marched on Sparta with his forces, intent on dismantling the city's reforms and reasserting Macedonian control. For the first time in centuries, the walls of Sparta, which had never been fortified, now faced the threat of a foreign army at its gates. Cleomenes, recognizing the futility of further resistance, made the painful decision to flee to Egypt, seeking refuge with Ptolemy III, a nominal ally of Sparta. Agiatis, left behind in Sparta, found herself in an increasingly precarious position. With Cleomenes in exile and Antigonus occupying the city, she became a target for those who sought to erase the legacy of reform. Yet, even in the face of personal danger, Agiatis remained steadfast. She refused to renounce the ideals she had fought for alongside Cleomenes and Agis IV, her resolve serving as a beacon for those who still believed in the dream of a better Sparta. The battle for Greek freedom, fought so valiantly at Sellasia, had ended in defeat, but its legacy endured. Cleomenes and Agiatis had challenged the forces of corruption and inequality, leaving a mark on Sparta that could not be erased. As they faced the uncertain future ahead, their story remained a testament to the power of vision, courage, and the unyielding spirit of those who dare to defy the odds. Cleomenes III's flight to Egypt marked the beginning of a dark chapter in his life and in the history of Sparta. The defeat at Sellasia had shattered the momentum of his reforms, leaving Sparta at the mercy of Antigonus III Theodosin and the Macedonian army. For the Spartans who had supported Cleomenes' vision of equality and renewal, the loss was not just a military defeat, it was a profound betrayal of the ideals they had fought to uphold. In Egypt, Cleomenes sought refuge in the court of Ptolemy III, the pharaoh who had once been an ally to Sparta. Initially, Cleomenes was welcomed with honor, his reputation as a bold reformer and brilliant strategist preceding him. Ptolemy saw in Cleomenes a potential asset, someone who might one day be used to stir unrest in the Peloponnesus and counter Macedonian dominance. However, as the years passed, Cleomenes found himself increasingly isolated, caught in the shifting sands of Egyptian politics. Back in Sparta, the city had fallen into chaos. Antigonus, determined to dismantle the reforms of Cleomenes, reinstated the oligarchic factions that had long dominated Spartan society. The lands redistributed under Cleomenes' rule were seized and returned to the elite, and the debts that had been forgiven were reinstated. The communal institutions Cleomenes and Agiatis had worked so hard to restore were dismantled, and the spirit of unity that had briefly animated Sparta was crushed under the weight of Macedonian occupation. Agiatis, left behind in this turmoil, bore the brunt of the city's shifting allegiances. As the widow of Agis IV and the wife of Cleomenes III, she was a living symbol of the reforms that the oligarchs sought to erase. Her presence was both a reminder of the dream of a better Sparta and a threat to those who sought to preserve the status quo. Despite this, Agiatis refused to flee or renounce her beliefs. She remained in Sparta, quietly working to support the remnants of the reformist movement and provide hope to those who had lost everything. Her courage, however, came at a cost. The oligarchs, emboldened by Antigonus' support, saw Agiatis as a dangerous figure who needed to be silenced. The details of her final days are shrouded in mystery, but the accounts that survive suggest that she endured immense suffering at the hands of her enemies. Some say she was subjected to public humiliation and violence, while others claim she was imprisoned and left to die in obscurity. What is certain is that her death marked the end of an era for Sparta, a final blow to the ideals of reform and equality that she had championed so fiercely. For Cleomenes, the news of Agiatis' death was devastating. Isolated in Egypt, he struggled to come to terms with the loss of his partner and the collapse of everything they had built together. The once bold king, who had stood against the might of Macedonia and dared to challenge the entrenched power of the Spartan elite, now found himself a pawn in a foreign court, his dreams reduced to ashes. Ptolemy III's death in 222 BCE further complicated Cleomenes' position. His successor, Ptolemy IV, was far less interested in the affairs of Greece and viewed Cleomenes with suspicion. No longer a valued ally, Cleomenes was placed under house arrest. effectively a prisoner in the very palace where he had once been a guest. Frustrated and humiliated, Cleomenes made several attempts to persuade Ptolemy IV to support a campaign to reclaim Sparta, but his pleas fell on deaf ears. In 219 BCE, after years of confinement and political marginalization, Cleomenes made a final, desperate bid for freedom. He and a small group of loyal followers staged an uprising in Alexandria, hoping to incite a rebellion that would secure their release. The plan, however, was poorly conceived and quickly suppressed by the Egyptian authorities. Cleomenes, realizing the futility of his situation, chose to end his life rather than face capture. In a final act of defiance, he took his own life, leaving behind a legacy of courage, conviction, and unfulfilled potential. The death of Cleomenes III marked the end of a bold and transformative chapter in Spartan history. His reforms, though ultimately undone, had reignited the spirit of equality and discipline that had once defined the city. Together with Agiatis, he had dared to dream of a Sparta that could rise above its divisions and reclaim its place in the Greek world. Their story, filled with triumphs and tragedies, served as a reminder of the power of vision and the resilience of those who fight for a better future. In the years that followed, Sparta would continue its slow decline, its glory days relegated to the annals of history. Yet, the memory of Cleomenes and Agiatis lived on, a testament to the enduring power of ideals in the face of overwhelming odds. Their lives, intertwined with the fate of their city, remain a powerful symbol of hope, sacrifice, and the relentless pursuit of justice. The news of Cleomenes III's defeat at Sellasia rippled through the Spartan streets like a cold wind, chilling the hearts of those who had dared to hope for a revitalized Sparta. For Agiatis, the widow of Agis IV and the wife of Cleomenes, the loss was deeply personal. She had lived through the betrayal and execution of her first husband, the collapse of his reforms, and now she faced the brutal reality of Macedonia's victory and the exile of Cleomenes. Despite the odds, she resolved to remain in Sparta, even as Antigonus III Theodosion's forces occupied the city and began dismantling everything she and Cleomenes had fought for. Agiatis knew her presence in Sparta was dangerous. She was a symbol of resistance, a living reminder of the reforms that had briefly uplifted the city's lower classes and challenged the entrenched power of the oligarchy. Her name was whispered with reverence among those who still believed in the ideals of equality and unity, but it also made her a target for those who sought to restore the old order. The Macedonian-backed oligarchs, emboldened by Antigonus' support, were eager to erase any trace of Cleomenes' legacy, and Agiatis was central to that legacy. In the weeks following Sellasia, Antigonus wasted no time in consolidating his hold over Sparta. He reinstated the ephors, the oligarchic magistrates whom Cleomenes had abolished, and restored the privileges of the wealthy elite. Lands that had been redistributed under Cleomenes' reforms were reclaimed by their former owners, leaving many of the newly enfranchised citizens dispossessed once more. The communal dining halls were dismantled, and the rigorous Agog training system was abandoned. Sparta's brief resurgence as a city of equality and discipline was undone with ruthless efficiency. For Agiatis, this return to oligarchic rule was a bitter blow. She watched helplessly as the city she loved was stripped of its newfound vitality, its people once again subjugated by the very forces she and Cleomenes had sought to overcome. Despite the danger, she refused to retreat into obscurity. Instead, she became a quiet but steadfast force of resistance, offering support and counsel to the reformists who remained loyal to Cleomenes' vision. Her home became a gathering place for those who still dreamed of a better Sparta. Former soldiers, disenfranchised citizens, and even some sympathetic elites would come to her for guidance, seeking solace in her unwavering commitment to the ideals of equality and justice. Agiatis, though deeply grieved by Cleomenes' exile, maintained a sense of purpose that inspired those around her. She spoke of the sacrifices made by Agis IV and Cleomenes, urging her fellow Spartans to hold onto the memory of their struggle as a beacon of hope. However, Agiatis' defiance did not go unnoticed. The oligarchs, keen to solidify their control over Sparta, viewed her as a threat that needed to be neutralized. Her influence among the people, coupled with her ties to Cleomenes, made her a constant reminder of the fragility of their newfound power. Whispers of plots against her began to circulate, and it was not long before the oligarchs took action. The circumstances of Agiatis' downfall are shrouded in mystery, but the accounts that survive paint a grim picture. According to some sources, she was arrested on charges of conspiring against the ephors. Though these accusations were likely fabricated, her home was raided, and her supporters scattered or arrested. Agiatis herself was taken into custody, subjected to harsh treatment intended to break her spirit and force her into submission. Despite the physical and emotional torment she endured, Agiatis remained defiant. She refused to renounce her beliefs or denounce Cleomenes, even under the threat of execution. Her stoicism in the face of such adversity only deepened the admiration of those who still supported her cause. Among the common people, stories of her bravery began to circulate, fueling a quiet but enduring resistance against the oligarchs. Some accounts suggest that Agiatis was eventually executed, though the exact details of her death remain unclear. Whether she was publicly humiliated, imprisoned and left to die, or quietly assassinated by her enemies, her passing marked the end of an era for Sparta. With her death, the last vestiges of Cleomenes' reforms were extinguished, and the city slipped further into the grip of Macedonian-backed oligarchy. For the people of Sparta, Agiatis' loss was a profound tragedy. She had been more than a queen. She had been a symbol of hope, a living embodiment of the ideals that had briefly breathed new life into the city. Her courage and conviction, even in the face of overwhelming odds, left an indelible mark on the hearts of those who had known her. In the years that followed, her name became synonymous with resistance and sacrifice, a reminder of what Sparta could have been. Meanwhile, Cleomenes, isolated in Egypt, received word of Agiatis' fate with a heavy heart. Her death was a devastating blow, not only because of the love and partnership they had shared, but also because it signified the collapse of everything they had fought to achieve. In his exile, Cleomenes was consumed by grief and frustration, his dreams of a restored Sparta slipping further from his grasp with each passing day. Yet, even in the wake of these tragedies, the legacy of Agiatis and Cleomenes endured. Their story, marked by triumph and heartbreak, became a source of inspiration for those who sought to challenge tyranny and inequality. Though their vision of a renewed Sparta was never fully realized, their efforts left an indelible imprint on the city's history, a testament to the power of conviction and the enduring fight for justice. Agiatis, in particular, became a figure of almost mythic proportions in the collective memory of Sparta. Her life, filled with sacrifice and defiance, served as a powerful reminder of the potential for courage and idealism to transform even the most entrenched systems of power. Through her unwavering dedication to the ideals of equality and unity, she carved a place for herself in the annals of history, ensuring that her story would not be forgotten. With Agiatis' tragic death, the last living symbol of Sparta's brief experiment with reform was extinguished. Yet her ideals and influence would carry on through her son, Cleomenes IV, the young heir to a lineage of kings and reformers. Though he was just a boy during the tumultuous reign of his father, Cleomenes IV would come to embody the hopes of those Spartans who still yearned for a return to the principles of equality and unity championed by his parents. In the immediate aftermath of Agiatis' death, Sparta descended further into chaos. The Macedonian-backed oligarchy tightened its grip on the city, and the reformist movement was pushed underground. Many of those who had supported Cleomenes III fled into exile, joining scattered communities of Spartans who continued to resist Antigonus III's dominance. These exiles carried with them the memory of Cleomenes and Agiatis, ensuring that their legacy endured in whispers and stories passed down through generations. Cleomenes IV, taken into protective custody by loyal supporters, was hidden away from the reach of the oligarchs who viewed him as a potential threat to their fragile rule. Raised in secrecy, he was taught the values that his parents had fought to uphold. The stories of Agis IV's idealism, Cleomenes III's boldness, and Agiatis' unwavering courage became the foundation of his education, instilling in him a sense of purpose that would define his life. As Cleomenes IV grew older, the weight of his heritage became increasingly apparent. Among the Spartan exiles, he was seen as a beacon of hope, a potential leader who could one day rally the scattered remnants of the reformist movement and reclaim Sparta from the grip of oligarchic corruption. Though still young, he demonstrated a keen intellect and a natural charisma that endeared him to those around him. His ability to inspire loyalty and confidence in others was a reflection of the legacy left by his parents. Meanwhile, the political landscape of Greece continued to evolve. Antigonus III's death in 221 BCE marked the end of an era for Macedonia, and his successor, Philip V, faced mounting challenges to his authority. The shifting balance of power created opportunities for resistance movements across the Peloponnesus. And among the Spartans in exile, there was renewed talk of reclaiming their homeland. Cleomenes IV, though still in his teens, began to emerge as a key figure in these discussions. Under the guidance of seasoned reformists who had served under his father, he learned the intricacies of strategy, diplomacy, and leadership. His education extended beyond the military, encompassing the philosophical ideals that had inspired the reforms of Agis IV and Cleomenes III. The young heir absorbed these lessons with a quiet determination, recognizing that his life's purpose was inexorably tied to the fate of Sparta. Back in Sparta, the oligarchs struggled to maintain control. Though they had eradicated the reforms of Cleomenes III, they could not erase the memory of his rule or the ideals that had briefly united the city. Among the lower classes, resentment toward the elite simmered, fueled by stories of Agiatis and Cleomenes that refused to fade. The reimposition of debt, the seizure of redistributed lands, and the abandonment of communal institutions deepened the divide between the ruling elite and the disenfranchised majority. Cleomenes IV's name began to spread among the disaffected Spartans, whispered as a symbol of hope and resistance. Though he remained in exile, his connection to the legacy of reform made him a rallying point for those who yearned for change. The reformists in Sparta, operating in secret, worked tirelessly to keep the dream of a better Sparta alive, using Cleomenes IV as a unifying figure in their efforts to rebuild the movement. By the time Cleomenes IV reached adulthood, he had become a capable leader in his own right. His understanding of the challenges facing Sparta was shaped not only by the stories of his parents but also by the harsh realities of life in exile. He understood that the path to reclaiming Sparta would be fraught with danger and that the forces of oligarchy and foreign domination were deeply entrenched. Yet, he also knew that the ideals of equality and unity, once ignited, could not be easily extinguished. Despite his readiness, Cleomenes IV faced a difficult choice. The Spartan exiles urged him to take up the mantle of leadership and launch a campaign to reclaim the city. But the odds were daunting. Macedonia remained a dominant power in the region, and the oligarchs in Sparta were well entrenched. Cleomenes IV, weighing the risks and the potential for bloodshed, chose to bide his time, focusing instead on building alliances and strengthening the reformist network. In the years that followed, Cleomenes IV became a central figure in the resistance movement. Though he never achieved the dramatic military victories of his father, his leadership helped to sustain the hope of a renewed Sparta. Through his efforts, the ideals of reform and equality continued to resonate, inspiring new generations of Spartans to challenge the status quo. The legacy of Agiatis lived on through her son, not just in name but in the ideals he carried forward. Her courage, wisdom, and unwavering commitment to justice became guiding principles for Cleomenes IV as he navigated the complexities of his inherited struggle. Though the dream of a fully restored Sparta remained elusive, the memory of Agiatis and her sacrifices served as a constant reminder of what was possible when individuals dared to challenge oppression. In the end, Cleomenes IV's life was a testament to the enduring power of his mother's influence. Through him, the story of Agiatis and Cleomenes III continued to inspire those who sought to create a more just and equitable society. While the Spartan reform movement never fully reclaimed its former momentum, its ideals lived on, leaving an indelible mark on the history of a city that had once defined the very concept of resilience and unity. Years turned into decades, and the echoes of Cleomenes III's reforms and Agiatis' sacrifice continued to ripple through the history of Sparta. Though their vision of a reformed and revitalized city-state had been brutally undone by Macedonian-backed oligarchs, their ideals refused to die. In the hearts and minds of many Spartans, particularly those disenfranchised by the reinstated inequalities, the memory of Cleomenes and Agiatis burned as a symbol of what might have been. Sparta itself became a paradox, a city haunted by its glorious past and burdened by its fractured present. The oligarchs, having reinstated their dominance, struggled to maintain control over a restless population. While they celebrated their victory over Cleomenes' reforms, they failed to restore the unity and discipline that had once defined Sparta's greatness. The wealth and power they hoarded did little to quell the growing resentment among the lower classes, who had tasted equality under Cleomenes' rule and now found themselves once again cast aside. In this tense and fractured society, the stories of Cleomenes III and Agiatis grew into something larger than life. Among the common people, their legacy transformed into legend, passed down through whispered tales and secret gatherings. Agiatis, in particular, became a figure of almost mythic proportions, a queen who had defied the oligarchs and given her life for the dream of a better Sparta. Her name was invoked in hushed prayers and rebellious songs, a reminder of the power of courage and conviction. Even the oligarchs, for all their efforts to erase the memory of Cleomenes and Agiatis, could not completely escape their shadow. The reforms, though dismantled, had revealed the deep flaws in Sparta's social structure. The concentration of land and wealth in the hands of a few, the exclusion of many from the privileges of citizenship, and the erosion of communal values had left Sparta vulnerable, not just to internal unrest but also to external threats. These vulnerabilities, laid bare by Cleomenes' bold attempts at change, could no longer be ignored. Meanwhile, outside Sparta, the broader Greek world continued to evolve. The Macedonian hegemony that had dominated Greece for decades began to weaken, challenged by the rise of new powers and shifting alliances. As Sparta's neighbors grappled with their own struggles for independence and self-determination, Cleomenes' reforms gained a new resonance. In cities like Corinth and Argos, where inequality and corruption had similarly taken root, the memory of Cleomenes' defiance became an inspiration for reformist movements. Among the Spartan exiles, many of whom had fled following Cleomenes' defeat, the dream of reclaiming their homeland endured. These exiles, scattered across the Greek world, carried with them the principles of equality and unity that had defined Cleomenes' reign. They worked tirelessly to build networks of support, seeking alliances with other reformist factions and sympathetic leaders. While they lacked the resources and military strength to mount a direct challenge to the oligarchs, their efforts kept the flame of resistance alive. One of the most enduring aspects of Cleomenes and Agiatis' legacy was their ability to inspire others to dream of a better future. Their story resonated far beyond the borders of Sparta, becoming a touchstone for those who sought to challenge oppression and inequality. Historians, philosophers, and poets of later generations would reflect on their lives, drawing lessons from their courage and the ideals they had fought to uphold. In time, even the oligarchs were forced to confront the realities of Sparta's decline. The social and economic inequalities that Cleomenes had sought to address continued to erode the city's strength, leaving it increasingly vulnerable to external pressures. The once proud city-state, which had resisted Macedonian domination and stood as a beacon of resilience, now faced the grim prospect of irrelevance. For all their victories over Cleomenes' reforms, the oligarchs could not escape the consequences of their own short-sightedness. As the years passed, the memory of Cleomenes and Agiatis became a part of Sparta's collective identity, a reminder of both its potential for greatness and its capacity for self-destruction. Among the younger generations, their story served as a cautionary tale, a reminder that true strength came not from wealth or power but from unity and shared purpose. The ideals of equality and discipline, though long buried, continued to resonate in the hearts of those who dared to imagine a better Sparta. Cleomenes IV, the son of Agiatis and Cleomenes III, became a key figure in preserving this legacy. Though he never reclaimed the throne or achieved the sweeping reforms his parents had envisioned, his efforts to sustain the memory of their struggle ensured that their story would not be forgotten. Through his leadership among the exiles and his advocacy for reform, he carried forward the torch of his parents' vision, ensuring that their sacrifices would inspire future generations. In the end, the legacy of Cleomenes and Agiatis was not one of unbroken triumph but of enduring hope. Their lives, filled with courage, sacrifice, and an unyielding commitment to justice, left an indelible mark on Sparta and the broader Greek world. Though their dream of a renewed Sparta was never fully realized, their story became a testament to the power of ideals and the resilience of the human spirit in the face of adversity. For Sparta, their legacy served as a reminder of what could have been, a vision of a city united by equality and shared purpose, standing strong against the forces of division and oppression. And for those who came after, their story stood as an enduring symbol of the fight for a better world, a fight that would continue long after their time had passed. The story of Agiatis and Cleomenes III, etched into the history of Sparta, is one of vision, sacrifice, and the unrelenting pursuit of justice. Though their reforms were ultimately undone and their lives ended in tragedy, their legacy endured, woven into the fabric of their city and the Greek world as a whole. Their lives were a testament to the enduring power of ideals, even in the face of overwhelming odds. As Sparta's twilight deepened, as people continued to wrestle with the ghosts of the past, the reforms of Cleomenes III and the courage of Agiatis were not easily forgotten. Their memory became both an inspiration and a reminder of the cost of complacency. In whispered conversations, in the songs of the disenfranchised, and in the hearts of those who longed for change, their story lived on, a beacon of hope for those who believed that a better Sparta was still possible. In the centuries that followed, Sparta faded from its position as a dominant force in the Greek world. The rise of Rome would overshadow the city-state, reducing it to a relic of its former glory. Yet, even as its walls crumbled and its influence waned, the legacy of Cleomenes and Agiatis remained. Their vision of a society built on equality, discipline, and shared purpose would echo far beyond their time, resonating with reformers and dreamers across generations. Historians and philosophers would later reflect on their story, seeing in it the universal struggle between oppression and liberation, tradition and progress. Cleomenes' boldness and Agiatis' wisdom became symbols of a fight that transcended their era, a fight for justice, for unity, and for a future unburdened by the failures of the past. Their efforts, though incomplete, served as a reminder that even the smallest victories in the pursuit of justice can inspire profound change. For Sparta, their legacy was a call to remember its true strength, not in wealth or conquest, but in its people. The ideals of Lycurgus, which had inspired both Agis IV and Cleomenes III, remained as a reminder of what the city could achieve when united by shared purpose. Though the oligarchs had succeeded in erasing the reforms, they could not extinguish the spark of hope that Agiatis and Cleomenes had ignited. In the final analysis, the story of Agiatis and Cleomenes is not one of defeat but of resilience. It is a story of two individuals who dared to dream of a better world, who stood against the forces of greed and corruption, and who paid the ultimate price for their convictions. Their legacy, carried forward by their son and by those who believed in their vision, serves as a timeless reminder of the power of courage and the enduring fight for justice. In the end, their story became more than just the tale of two reformers. It became a symbol of the eternal human struggle for equality, for purpose, and for a better future. And though Sparta's walls may have crumbled and its power faded, the spirit of Agiatis and Cleomenes lived on, a light that refused to be extinguished, shining brightly in the annals of history,